Here.
Mr. Haas.
Here.
Mr. Hellman.
Here.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Here.
Mr. Palmer.
Present.
Mr. Russell.
Here.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Here.
Mr. Slough.
Here.
Ms. Warnicki.
Here.
Mr. Wolfser.
Present.
Will you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I will entertain a motion to accept the previous city council meeting minutes. Mr. Slough.
I move to approve the minutes as circulated.
Second, Mr. Niemeyer. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of accepting the previous city council meeting minutes of February 16th, please say aye. Any opposed, nay? They are accepted. Mr. Russell, do we have any add-on replacements or removal from tonight's agenda?
We have a couple. We have a replacement for the 2020 Shade Tree Commission annual report, which will be also discussed during oral communications. We have a replacement for ordinance 2021-016 as amended, which is a rebid of contracts for city insurance policies. We have a replacement for ordinance 2021-020 in the legislation section, which is the K-9 unit donation. And we actually have a removal. A zoning amendment petition for East Bigelow Avenue is requested to be removed from the agenda, and I would make that all that in a motion to replace as the three items and remove as requested.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. The motion is adopted. Mayor Miron, we have a proclamation this evening.
Well, good evening. I'll read the proclamation and then I'll invite some individuals from the Blanchard Valley Center up to receive this proclamation. Typically, we present this proclamation in recognition of Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month at the basketball games when we're all having a lot of fun. But obviously this year we can't do that, but I would encourage you to take this opportunity this month to learn a little bit more about the organizations that we have that support individuals with different abilities, as well as the great work and individuals that are in our community, families, friends, neighbors who have different abilities. So whereas the Hancock County Board of Developmental Disabilities was established in October 1952, and whereas the mission and purpose of Ohio's county boards of DD remain as strong as ever, with county boards continuing to provide vital supports and resources to Ohioans with developmental disabilities and their families. Whereas the more than 600 people with developmental disabilities served by the Hancock County Board of Developmental Disabilities, their families, friends, neighbors, and coworkers encourage everyone to focus on the abilities of all people. And whereas the most effective way to increase this awareness is through everyone's active participation in community activities and the openness to learn and acknowledge each individual's contribution. And whereas policies must be developed, attitudes shaped, and opportunities offered that allow people with developmental disabilities to live as independently and productively as possible in our community. And whereas we encourage all citizens to foster and support such opportunities that include full access to education, housing, employment, and recreational activities. Now, therefore, I, Christina M. Murd, Mayor of the City of Findlay, Ohio, do hereby proclaim March 2021 as Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month in Findlay, and offer full support to efforts that assist people with disabilities to make choices that enable them to live successful lives and realize their potential. I further encourage all citizens to join in the celebration by spreading awareness of the many contributions offered by people with developmental disabilities in our community. All right, I think we have Molly here, and I apologize, I forget your name, the superintendent of the organization. Thank you. We'll have them come forward. Great, thank you. Congratulations. And I just real quick want to recognize they do so much within our community. I know we have have a number of individuals that work and serve our community on a daily basis, but also they do a fantastic job of raising awareness and encouraging everyone to live their best life. And so thank you for the work that you guys do each and every day. It's really important, and certainly proud to be able to recognize it this month. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Before you go, girls, does anybody from council have any comments or questions? Mr. Schindeldecker.
Only that the Blanchard Valley Center is a real gem in our community. I know of people who have moved to Hancock County to avail themselves of the services of Blanchard Valley Center for their children. Some from as far away as the Cleveland area. You do a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you, girls. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Okay. Back to our agenda. We do not have any recognition or retirement resolutions. We do have two individuals that like to, under oral communications, we're going to start with Tom Mills, who's going to give us an update on the Findlay Shade Tree Commission.
Thank you, John. We appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. The first thing I'd like to do is introduce a colleague of our Shade Tree Commission, Brian Bauman, who's joined us this evening. And I'd like to say thank you all to all of you for your support of the Shade Tree Commission and trees here in Findlay. Thank you much to the mayor. She's been extremely active on our Shade Tree Commission, and we certainly appreciate that activity. Thank you all very much. As you all know, it's been a challenging year in 2020. Always been a tough year. It has indeed been a challenging year in 2020. However, it's led us to, I think, step up a little bit in terms of the virtual sorts of meetings. We postponed, changed dates and a lot of our things last year, got into virtual meetings on a regular basis, and still are meeting virtually as recently as this afternoon. But I think this has all helped us to grow in this regard. I'm kind of getting used to these meetings, and they're not all that bad after all. They save some time, and we're able to do the work of the city in this regard. We had a number of statewide virtual meetings that we participated in this year, in 2020. The Ohio's Urban Forestry Conference went virtual 2020. That was a several-day thing in which we were working with folks from all over Ohio in a virtual activity. Ohio also piloted a virtual Tree Commission Academy in 2020. And we, as a city, did take part in that. For it to be a little nicer, Randy, you recall going through it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Virtual did make it nicer. It was, again, several days, several weeks in a row, but it worked out real well in that regard. We were able to get our Arbor Day program in this past fall, and our Neighborhoods program and our Adopt a Tree program in this past fall. So these programs worked out in spite of the COVID, and we're underway now with plans for the 2021 year. As of this afternoon, we're probably going to go with our Arbor Day program, the 23rd of April, looking at Chamberlain Hill School, working with the school folks in this regard, looking at our Neighborhoods program and Adopt a Tree program probably being this fall, as they were last year, just to get us a little further out there and allow us the preparation time needed to do it properly. Our Shade Tree Commission involves a number of individuals. Brian, of course, is one of those members. Ed Crawford has been a member for a number of years. Barb Sherman has been a member. Ben Dolan, a member. We appreciate city staff involvement and city council involvement. Jim Niemeyer, thank you for your involvement. Dave Hans, AJ Kappas, Jeremy Kalb, and our acting service director, the mayor, involved in that regard. So we appreciate all these folks. Also, I want to say thank you to Denise, and Kathy, and Robin for their stellar support behind the scenes. It wouldn't happen without them. And thank you very much to all of you again. Appreciate it. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to try to entertain them.
Any questions for Tom? Mr. Russell.
Tom, good to see you. I'm sorry I didn't recognize you when you walked in. I had a stupid thing, the mask. But do you have any idea where Neighborhoods will be focused on this year?
Well, we're looking at a couple of neighborhoods over on the east side off of Fishlock, Remington, and let's see, the other street. There's one right nearby that is also in need of trees as well. We're going to try to do some additional searching, if you will, additional advertising for tree properties to do some work in. We'd like to expand that opportunity, just to make sure we're ready to go for the fall.
And so for, if there are people of the thousands and thousands who are listening to us at this very moment, how would they contact just the Shade Tree Commission via the city's website, or how would you like them to get in touch with
A
you?
number of ways they could go. They could call the mayor's office, talk with Kathy Lunder, just to name and address, that sort of thing, or call Public Works office, talk with Robin over there, let them know they're interested in planting trees. We would make connections with them then in that regard and get down to particulars.
And then lastly, for all of us with lots of trees in our yards, what is now the appropriate time that we should be pruning them?
Generally, trees need to be pruned in the wintertime when they're down, if you will, for the season. November, February, getting a little bit on the late side right now. They're beginning to kick into gear, I hope. Hopefully we'll get a whole lot more snow, but November-ish, and after that, up to about February is probably the best time to do it. There are particular ways and means of pruning trees appropriately, and we do have some material literature in that regard from the International Society of Arboriculture to instruct folks on how to best do that with their trees.
And I'll take the one thing from that is that you're promising me spring is on the way. If we get a foot of snow on March 16th, I will be at your door with a snow shovel.
I hope so.
Mayor Muir.
Any other questions?
I was just gonna add, Tom, real quick. We added a page on the City of Findlay website on the shade tree where you can sign up to show that you're interested in a tree, so that we can collect those year round and then start reaching out to neighborhoods and kind of build that list for future projects. The other thing that we just started is that we are actually working with the University of Findlay, a biology student, I believe, who will be graduating in May, but she is conducting a canopy tree survey of Findlay for us to show us about what is our tree coverage, canopy coverage, and is comparing us to a couple of other communities in the area to provide us some benchmarks as we kind of decide what our goals are in area, and it will look at different neighborhoods that may need additional tree coverage. So some great work going on at the shade tree.
Like I say, our mayor is active with this. We certainly appreciate that. All this technology stuff is great. The website and so forth, Lynn Dolan is kind of doing it from the Shade Tree Commission side and working together in that regard.
Yeah, trying to communicate so folks
it's
know that the shade tree's
great.
out there, and I am currently seeking interest for another appointment to the Shade Tree Board Commission. So if somebody is interested, they can email me their bio. I think I put the deadline as either this Friday or next Friday.
Any other questions for Tom? Tom, keep up the good work.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Our second individual is Kayla Fortman, and she would like to speak about DOOR.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kayla Portman. I'm the Executive Director at Focus Recovery and Wellness Community. So, and the reason why DOOR was put on there was we have now youth services downtown in that location of where it's going to be designated for the outdoor refreshment area. We are located on 129 East Crawford. We serve age range from 13 to 18. The only concern really is obviously a lot of the youth that we do have as participants walk from their homes into our location. And having it in that downtown location, just making sure there's safeguards and preventative measures in place to make sure that the youth aren't, especially with the social norms with drinking, and if they're walking downtown and seeing many of those individuals, that social norm of drinking being okay and just kind of that reinforcement is something that for our youth we'll be able to make conversations out of. But we would like for it also to be from the city perspective as well, to show the youth kind of those preventative measures that can come in place. And then I think too, when it comes to the disposal of those, I know that it's going to be in clear plastic cups, and the mayor was gracious enough to come out and speak with Claire and I over at the loft. And this is kind of reiterating our importance of it, because having those cups, we want to make sure that there's proper disposal of them, due to the fact, again, youth are going to be walking in this location. This is where our location is for the youth services. It is called the loft. So if you guys wanted to look more into it, you definitely could. But having that safe disposal would make sure and eliminate or decrease the potential for youth picking up anything that maybe is left behind. You know, teenagers get curious, so, you know, kind of eliminating that by increases of potentially disposal areas, but also on the cups. I know that the community partnership brought up having it actually identify on how to dispose of it appropriately. I think that would be a great preventative measure to make sure that those are not sitting out for potential youth to collect. So that is my say on kind of what we are hoping for. I understand it's for businesses, but just making sure that the youth are protected in this, especially since it is in that downtown location of where this is going to be located. So I just wanted to be able to, and thank you guys for taking my time, or taking your time to be able to listen to me and the concerns.
Kayla, hang out for a second. There are a
Yeah.
couple of questions. Mr. Wilson.
Excuse me, Kayla, thank you for coming in
Yeah.
and sharing your thoughts with us. First up, was it East or West Crawford?
So this is East Crawford, 129 East Crawford.
129 East Crawford, okay. And what are your hours of operation?
We are open from 3 to 6.
3 to 6, very good. All right, that's all I had, thank you.
Yeah. And we do have, and I will add to, Spectrum LGBTQ Plus has support groups after the 6 o'clock hour at that location, and it is a youth group as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? You said something about the loft. Tell us what that is.
Yeah, so the Loft is the name of our youth services. So Focus Recovery Wellness is the overall agency name, but we have adult services, youth services, and recovery homes underneath of that. So the Loft is what we call the youth services.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you
Good
guys.
job. Okay, the petition on your agenda was withdrawn. Written communications, we have none. Reports of municipal officers and departments.
A letter from Police Chief Ring regarding a donation in memory of Rex Fishball.
Questions or comments? Hearing none. Letter to be filed, or report to be filed.
A letter from City Engineer Thomas regarding Logan Avenue Phase 3 OPWC project number 328-94300.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from City Engineer Thomas regarding second capital improvement appropriation of 2021.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from City Auditor Stashak regarding credit card reader for all city departments.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
A letter from City Auditor Stashak regarding police and fire union contracts comparison of benefits.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
A letter from City Engineer Thomas regarding COVID grant offer for Findlay Airport.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Letter from Mayor Mern regarding sidewalk cafe permit fees.
Questions or comments? Mr. Hellman.
If I may, I'd just like to note that I in fact support this. I think anything we can do to help some of the smaller businesses, particularly the restaurants, and cut some of their expenses would be advantageous. But I also have a request, and that is that I ask the city administration to look into something that is happening in other cities, mostly big cities, Philadelphia, Columbus, Chicago, Boston, New York, and that is where the city puts a cap on the amount of the percentage of fees that a delivery service for food of these restaurants can impose on the owner of the restaurant. Right now, if you call one of those delivery services, that fee is not so much paid by the customer, but it is taken out of the restaurant's charge, sometimes up to 30%. So it really is a significant impact, particularly on the smaller restaurants. And these cities now restaurants are beginning to feel the pinch rather significantly, and cities are passing a piece of legislation that in fact limits them sometimes, I've read it here, as low as 5%, but other places say that 10%, 15% is more reasonable. And I guess I would request the mayor, the law director, whomever, if the city of Findlay could take a look at that, and whether or not, even on a temporary basis until we get back to normal, if they could look into this and maybe utilize the assistance of the Chamber of Commerce or the Ohio Restaurant Association, the Economic Development Alliance Board, to see whether or not this is something reasonable that we could do to help particularly the smaller, more independent restaurants. So that is my request and my suggestion, and I have some literature here that I could share with them as well.
Any other questions or comments on Mr. Russell?
Yes, Mayor, the letter asks that the council is requested to authorize the waiving of the fee. Is there or maybe it's a question for you or for Don, can we just do that on a quick voice vote? I'm seeing a nod, so I would make a motion that we would, per the request, eliminate the fees for sidewalk cafes for calendar year 2021.
Second, Ms. Warnicki. Any additional comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of waiving the sidewalk cafe permit fees for 2021, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The fees will be waived for the calendar year 2021. Any other questions or comments regarding this letter? Hearing none, let's move on.
City Planning Commission minutes for February 11th, 2021, as well as the agenda for March 11th, 2021.
Questions or comments? Minutes and agenda to be filed. We have no committee reports, legislation, resolutions.
First reading for Resolution 6, 2021, a resolution to approve charging customers a fee for processing credit debit card payments at any of the various City of Findlay offices.
Mr. Wilson.
Make a motion that council statutory rules be suspended, this resolution be given its second, third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of suspending the rules of council, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
And Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the resolution its second and third reading.
Resolution 6, 2021, Resolution 6, 2021.
Mr. Slough.
I have moved for adoption of Resolution 6-2021.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion? Mr. Wilson.
The reason we wanted to suspend and push this through, if you council remember, we had a similar piece of legislation that only took care of the utilities. This is a little bit more wider sweeping and involves the income tax, and we wanted to get that in place before April 15th. So that's why I wanted to get that done.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of Resolution 006-2021, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The resolution is adopted.
First reading for Resolution 7, 2021. A resolution approving the expenditures made by the Auditor's Office on the attached list of vouchers which either exceeded purchase order or were incurred without a purchase order, exceeding the statutory limit of $3,000, all in accordance with Ohio Revised Code 5705.41D.
Mr. Wilson.
Make a motion to approve this resolution.
Second, Mr. Slough. Any discussion or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor of Resolution 007-2021, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
The resolution is adopted. Ordinances.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-9, an ordinance authorizing the establishment of Findlay designated outdoor refreshment area, making certain findings and determinations, and enacting regulations to that effect.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-009.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion. Mr. Wobson.
Mayor, you've been the aggregator of comments and suggestions about this. We received more in our packet tonight from the community partnership. Anything that you would suggest that we make a change in this prior to the vote?
I do not. I know I've talked to a number of different entities and a number of you regarding the communication that was received. So I'll go through it how it is in my mind. So I know that a lot of the feedback was related to expanding it to include West End and the Fern. As those of you who attended the ad hoc committee meeting, we discussed that at length and then determined to start with a smaller area for the time being that also aligned with the Downtown Findlay Improvement District to ensure that we had a clean and safe environment and we're able to maintain that, and then we could look at expanding it. The second item of feedback was folks concerned with, public intoxication, disorderly conduct, items of that nature. Again, we'll have to see if that starts occurring. All indications have been that that is not something that increases, that we would expect to see with this. All of the public intoxication laws, et cetera, still apply. This just allows you to have an open container as long as it's in the marked container and purchased from a downtown establishment. And then the third is obviously just related to concerns related to creating social norms around drinking, and certainly want to be sensitive to that. And as Kayla and Zach have both shared over the last couple of months, though I am supportive of making sure that we as a community are doing our best to work to address those concerns, I would prefer that we not put it in the application because of needing to then follow up on the administrative process of making sure that that is occurring. And so really what I would like to do is, certainly we want to be a good community partner. The application as it is currently written allows us to have some administrative purview on the design of the cup, so we can look at how we may be able to include some safe drinking guidelines on the cup. That's something we're going to look at, and then I would also just work with Zach and the Community Collaborative and potentially the Restaurants Association to make that training available to businesses on a regular basis, because I think that that's something beneficial to have regardless. My concern is related to tracking and following up on that because of putting it in the application. So I would, at this point, not recommend any changes to the application as it has been shared with the community.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Russell?
Yeah, one statement is that the establishments that enjoy the benefits of the DORA still have a liquor license with the state of Ohio, and all the laws that are applicable to that liquor license still apply and do not change just because they are now in a DORA. So just as they are legally liable if they serve an intoxicated individual now, they would be legally liable if they served an intoxicated individual in a DORA cup. And that the DORA doesn't change any of that. And I believe that our downtown establishments have been good stewards of their of the responsibilities that go along with having the liquor license. And I don't believe that the DORA changes any of that.
Mr. Slap?
Mayor, will any consideration be given in the future to the West End and the Fern?
Certainly. Yeah, I think nothing's off limits as we evaluate this. Council has the opportunity to, in the future, propose amendments to the designated area.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Wobson?
I just wanted to say that I'm in favor of this. I think it's a good thing for our downtown. We've invested a lot of money over the last 10 years in our downtown. I think this is another good addition to continue to have a thriving and vibrant downtown area. I think we need to remember, though, that this is a living document. We can suspend it at any point in time. Is that correct, Mayor?
Yes.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was tracking with, yes, you can obviously always suspend legislation, but talking to the application and the use of the DORA, council has the authority at any time to terminate or suspend the DORA activity with a majority vote of council.
Right. So I think we'll see how this goes. Hopefully it'll be just like the other communities that we've talked to that are similar sized cities, similar sized situations, and have worked well. And I expect that will be the same with us. Thank you.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
with anything new, there's always some concern, but having been around a long time, having actually sold beer tickets for the Boogie on Broadway and a couple of other things, because my wife was a board member and they wanted some of the people. We sold beer tickets quicker than you could print money. But with all of these activities that we've had over the years, the rib-off, the Boogie, the car shows and so forth, I can recall, and I'm sure there probably were others, but I can only recall one minor incident in which possible intoxication had to be dealt with by the police. So we behave ourselves for the most part, and although this is new, it should not be as frightening as some people believe. I think.
Any other questions or comments? Ms. Warnicki?
I had somebody bring up to me, like, I almost forgot, but since he mentioned the car show, when you've got people out there with their vintage cars and whatever, would they do anything to, I don't know, maybe not have them right there so somebody didn't spill a beer in somebody's car? Or it's just one of them I thought of that might not work well with that.
So doors would still be permitted unless there is an event in which alcohol sales are going to occur. So for example, Oktoberfest, they have to get a liquor permit for that event. That's why they have the barriers, that's why they have the wristbands and all of that. During special events like that, the DORA would not apply. So that event has a special, like, if somebody just organizes a cruise night like we had lots of over the summer, the DORA would not be changed. And actually, I think people would probably appreciate it and take advantage of it that. But unless there is a designated event permit, which has its separate liquor license, the DORA would be in effect.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of ordinance 2021-009, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Nay.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker,
Aye.
Mr. Slough,
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki,
Nay.
Mr. Wolfson,
Aye.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Haas,
Aye.
and Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
2 nays.
The vote is 8-0. The ordinance is adopted.
8-2.
8-2, I'm sorry. What did I say?
0.
Oh, 8-2. I didn't, let's not say that. Okay.
I didn't win, but you didn't have to take an eye out of the game.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-10, an ordinance authorizing the city of Findlay, Ohio to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Hancock County Commissioners. A copy of said memorandum of understanding is attached hereto and incorporated herein as Exhibit A. That is a third reading.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-010.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion, questions or comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of ordinance 2021-010, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer,
Aye.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker,
Aye.
Mr. Slough,
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki,
Aye.
Mr. Wolfson,
Aye.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
and Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-11, an ordinance authorizing the city of Findlay, Ohio to enter into an agreement with Rainick LTD, whereby Rainick LTD shall donate all of its rights, title, and interest in and to said property as set forth herein and attached hereto as Exhibit A.
Mr. Wolfson.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Any questions or comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of ordinance 2021-011, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell,
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker,
Aye.
Mr. Slough,
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki,
Aye.
Mr. Wolfson,
Aye.
Mr. Greeno,
Aye.
Mr. Haas,
Aye.
Mr. Hellman,
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer,
Aye.
and Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-12, an ordinance accepting and approving an application for annexation of territory situated in the Township of Marion, County of Hancock, State of Ohio, and being a part of Section 6 South, Township 1 North, Range 11 East, a tract of land consisting of 8.584 acres of land more or less, hereinafter referred to as the Amber Waves Development Annexation.
Mr. Slough.
I would move for adoption of ordinance 2120 or 2021-12.
Second, Mr. Haas.
The 21st century.
Second, Mr. Haas. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of ordinance 2021-013, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
1, 2.
012.
Oh, you're having troubles
Struggling with
tonight.
this one.
Let me repeat myself. All those in favor of ordinance 2021-012, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wokser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-13. An ordinance amending chapter 1100 et sec of the codified ordinances of the city of Findlay, Ohio, known as the zoning code, by zoning the following described property as I-1 Light Industrial, hereinafter referred to as the Amber Waves Development Annexation.
Mr. Wilson.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion, questions, or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of ordinance 2021-013, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wokser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
And Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-14, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-014.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion, questions, or comments? Mr. Wilson.
We've had quite a bit of a discussion on this in prior meetings. I don't think we have the head of the health department is not here tonight to answer questions, but as I've talked to people and in the community, and we've discussed this expenditure for the mobile health clinic, there's a couple of things that come to my mind that are concerning. Number one, we really have not been able to determine exactly what communities are not currently being served, that this is going to help. Number two, some people may not know that we have got the Kaufman Health Center, who takes care of all people, and they even offered, they pay for cab rides or give rides to people to come to their clinic to be served. And the last thing that just comes from my mind of how you run one of these things, we're looking at $700K just to get the thing started, and then we've got ongoing expense. Now I know that health department has told us that they won't add that on to our bill, but ultimately, if it doesn't, it has to come to our bill and our percentage of paying for the health department. And these types of things, I think, are very difficult to manage and expensive to maintain over time. It may look good in the first couple of years, but I think down the road it's something that's going to be an ongoing expense, an additional expense to the community. And for those reasons, I'm going to vote no on this legislation.
Mr. Russell.
I did a lot of, I did some research and talked with some folks on mobile health clinics and their effectiveness and like who their target market is. And I know a lot of folks have said that Hancock County is not that large. Kaufman Clinic, the hospital, the emergent care facilities are all within easy distance from anywhere in the county. But I think when it comes to public health, and especially the target markets for a mobile health clinic, the challenge isn't measured in miles to clinics. It's accessibility. It's the for lack of a better term, convenience. It's the ability to get family members to the facilities for more preventative type actions. And I tell you what really changed or solidified my mind in this was a conversation with a working mother in a job where she had flexibility to get her kids to immunizations and shots like that. And she said, oh my gosh, if a health clinic like this was available and would show up to the school and provide a place where I could just sign a form and the kid could go to school and get their shots or their sports physical or whatever, their wellness check, how great that would have been, because she had to take time off, half a day of work, and then juggle and schedule. And this is a person who had the ability to manage that. And then she finished it by saying, imagine somebody at Ball or a Whirlpool, how they are able to, how do they juggle it? And that's the challenge that the mobile health clinic is trying to address. Now, I agree, Jeff, that there's going to be added expenses with this over time. And that's really why at the last meeting I wanted to hear more about our appointment to the health district, because, and I'm trying to remember her name, I think it's Miss Pastor. She's the one that's going to have to hold the feet to the fire of the health department to make sure that this thing is managed well, that this thing is made accessible, not just during the 8 to 5 hours that the health department might want to normally work, but maybe they're going to be doing night visit or off-hour visits at different establishments, and this thing is being put to good use. But that's why we have a health board representing the city of Findlay's interests on the health board, and that's that commission's and those board members' job to ensure that this thing is being used. And I think that they will. I was really happy to hear Ms. Pastor's qualifications. I think it's a good investment that if we can improve community health, that is a benefit to the community. If we don't have people home with sick kids or having to take a day off to get immunizations, that's helping our local businesses. I'm very glad many a year ago that the city and the county and others combined our health departments. I think it's paid off, and we can see that paying off, especially during COVID. I see this as another extension of that cooperative efforts, and I was very glad to see that the Hancock County Commissioners also felt it was worth the effort and it was worth donating. And I agree with that, and for those reasons, I will be supporting it.
Mr. Schendelter.
I've had communications from people whom I respect, their financial background and their health background and so forth. Most of the objections I've heard had to do with, we really don't need it in Findlay. The surrounding communities, Macomb and Van Buren, Van Loo, and so on and so forth, would take greater advantage of a mobile unit. That's not necessarily the case. That's important that they do, but you add up the nursing homes and so forth, and as Jeff and Grant mentioned, the schools and the availability of on-scene medical attention and so forth. I think it's a good idea. I've been here a long time, and it took 50 years, more than 50 years, to actually get the city and the county health departments to merge into one. We finally have one that is operating efficiently, and I think they've done an extremely good job, and I will trust them, and I would support this as well.
Ms. Warnick.
Mayor, I guess I have a question for you since the health director isn't here. Did I read in Friday's paper, did I read it correctly when it said that because they got the donation from the county that they went ahead and purchased the mobile unit?
I think they were looking to place the order. I don't know if they have specifically done that, but with the financial commitments from the commissioners, from Rotary Group, from some private donors, and the Community Foundation, they had the funds to get the program up and running, yes.
Well, that's just what I read, and I did, also, the way I read it was that the county donation was going to match what we donated, and we hadn't voted yet. It kind of felt like maybe that was trying to back us into a corner.
When they said, so they voted to match the city's donation up to $100,000. So, certainly if we don't donate, then they won't be donating, but I think that we had come to them and said, we want to see you move first, and they said, we'll move first, but we got to jump in together.
Well, it wasn't really them, it was the fact that, oh, we're gonna go ahead and purchase this at that time. I was just curious about that, the way that was worded.
Well, as we've talked, there's quite a lead time, and they're trying to get it purchased and operational as soon as possible. So I'm not sure if they have gone ahead and purchased it, but I would not be surprised by that if they had.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any additional? Mr. Niemeyer?
From what I understand, our appropriated funds are more than what the counties are gonna be. And I just can't see spending taxpayers' money like this when, that's not what they're paying taxes for. I have nothing against the health department, and I'd like to get some votes in the May primary, so I'm gonna vote no.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none. Oh, Mr. Hellman.
I guess I'd just like to clarify a little bit. The Hancock County population is about 74,000 people. Of that, 41,000 or 55% is in the city of Findlay, leaving you with about 34,000 people, or 45% are in the rural area and outside the city of Findlay. So, having said that, the fact that they're asking us to maybe provide a little bit more doesn't bother me in the least. And I think that also, keep in mind that not everybody is of the means maybe that a lot of the people in this room are, or who we associate with. That there are people out there who don't have access to health care, don't know that they've got health related issues, whether diabetes or heart issues, and if they can get tested and get caught early on, I think it would do those individuals in this community a world of good. So I'm 100% in support of it. And I understand the concerns of others, but I think you sort of look at this as providing a service to our citizens in the city and in the county, more or less just like an infrastructure improvement. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Wilson?
I appreciate Dennis's comments and the demographic information. It brings up a very good point. I think also that from what Grant was saying and other people, that the usage of this would be more in the county than it would be in the city. For that reason, I would make an amendment to make a motion to amend this to 100,000 versus the 150,000 that's currently on the legislation.
Mr. Slab?
I would second that.
Any discussion? No, there's no discussion on an amendment, right? All those in favor of amending the ordinance to read 100,000 versus 150,000, say aye if your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wolfser?
Aye.
Mr. Guarino?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
No.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Nay.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Nay.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
We have 3 nays, 2 nay.
73. The ordinance is amended. Any further discussion on the ordinance as amended? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Mayor.
Mayor, I'm sorry.
You're
Thought
fine.
I was almost there.
I sit in your blind spot. I was just gonna further comment on the ability to go within our community and the comments related to the Kaufman Center, because certainly we want to make sure that we are not taking resources from other areas within our community. And I think it's important to think that this is a resource to go out into our community, whether it be sitting up at a school near a park when families are able to, on their, during the day or on their way home, get those vaccines, do the well child visits, whatever that may be, do those blood pressure screenings, and then our health coordinators with the health department are then able to say, hey, we did find that you have high blood pressure, let's get you an appointment at the Kaufman Clinic, or hey, you don't have insurance, let's help you with the paperwork. So this is an entry path into the healthcare system within our community, and it helps lower those costs that are borne by everyone in some form. It helps create productivity. And then I know we haven't talked about it this evening, but the ability to go to businesses and do health screenings on site and provide benefit to them from insurance discounts because they're doing that. So there's a lot of different benefits, and so I think that this is well worth our dollars. I think we'll definitely see the return. The other thing I would mention is if you are looking, as you look at our community health assessment, if there are specific measures that you believe we should be tracking as correlating back to this, that's one of the things the health board is going to be doing. If this moves forward, they will put together benchmarks to be able to track, just as Councilman Russell mentioned. It's their responsibility to make sure this is effective and show to the community that it has been beneficial. That's also going to support their abilities to be able to get grant funding down the road. And so that has been the very clear message that, hey, we're helping get this initial funding set up, and then you're responsible for securing it moving forward. Thank you.
Mr. Wobson.
I appreciate council reducing this amount to $100,000. However, it hasn't changed my mind. I still don't think this is a good expense for the city. Appreciate what the mayor's saying, and if all of those things were happening, this might be a good thing to do, but that's a lot. It's a big hill to climb in my opinion, so I will still vote no on this legislation.
Any additional questions, comments? Hearing none. All those in favor of the amendment of the ordinance as amended, say aye. If your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Wilkser?
Nay.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Nay.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
And Mr. Slough?
Aye.
2 nays.
The ordinance is adopted as amended.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-16 as amended. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service of the City of Findlay, Ohio to take bids and enter into contracts for insurance coverage for airport liability, automobile, boiler machinery, contractors' equipment, crime insurance, police professional liability, public officials' errors and omissions liability, real and personal property, and declaring an emergency. Second reading for ordinance 2021-17. An ordinance amending chapter 1100 et sec of the codified ordinances of the City of Findlay, Ohio, known as the zoning code, by rezoning the following described property, referred to as 610 South Blanchard Street rezone, which previously was zoned C1 Local Commercial District to R4 Duplex Triplex. Second reading for ordinance 2021-18. An ordinance authorizing the service director of the City of Findlay, Ohio to enter into an agreement with Verizon Wireless NASPO MA-152 to continue to participate in a joint cooperative purchasing program for the City of Findlay's wireless services and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
I would move that the council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2021-018 be given its third reading.
All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye. If your name is, second, Mr. Haas. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye. If your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
I guess not understanding why we're doing that, I would vote no.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Nay.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its third reading.
Ordinance 2021-18.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-018.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion. Mr. Hellman.
I guess, is there an explanation as to why we're moving this forward on second and third reading?
Mr. Stashak.
Yes, and thank you for the question, and I want to apologize to council as a whole. At your last meeting, I should have included a letter. We're attempting to get cell phone contracts in order in a manner which saves the city money. And it was an oversight that I did not provide a letter in your packet where I would have requested it to be read as an emergency at the last reading. So I take full responsibility for that. And I had asked a couple of the members if they would be willing to put forth the emergency so we could get it done, get things done, and get the money saved in a timely fashion.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Hellman.
Yeah, can you explain that a little bit, Jim? You were saying that they're under a time crunch to get this done and they don't want to wait.
Yeah, contracts sometimes are in time crunch. We have cell phones that are in place. The service agreements are up, the cell phone agreements are up, and we need to renew them. And it is, it's an oversight on my part. I was saying that I didn't get you that request at your last
No,
meeting.
I'm not trying to
No problem.
put blame on anybody. I'm just trying to understand. Apparently, the contracts are coming due before our next board, before our next council meeting.
Yes. Yeah, and again, I apologize to this body. Yeah, we don't normally make that kind, or I don't normally make that kind of mistake because I got crack staff, but apparently I didn't listen to them, so it's my fault.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance, say aye. If your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2021-19, an ordinance to approve current replacement pages to the Findlay codified ordinances and declaring an emergency. First reading for ordinance 2021-20, an ordinance appropriating funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Move that the council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2021-020 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of suspending the rules, all those in favor of suspending the rules of council, say aye. If your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give this ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-20. Ordinance 2021-20.
Mr. Wilson.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion, questions? Mr. Russell.
I did not know Mr. Fishbaugh, but I do express my appreciation that he considered the Findlay Police Department, specifically the K-9 unit, at the time of his passing. So thank you to the family and those who made this gift possible.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance, say aye. If your name is called. Those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindledecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
And Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2021-21, an ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Okay. next.
First reading for ordinance 2021-22, an ordinance authorizing the service director and the safety director of the city of Findlay, Ohio to advertise for bids where required and enter into contract or contracts for construction of various projects in accordance with the 2021 department equipment list, appropriating and transferring funds for said capital expenditures and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
First reading for ordinance 2021-23, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, service director, and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio to enter into all required agreements or documents in order to receive coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriations grant funds to address a COVID-19 public health emergency to be utilized at the City of Findlay Airport and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Move the council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2021-023 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. All those in favor of suspending the rules all those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
And Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-23, ordinance 2021-23.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-023.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion, questions, or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
And Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. Yeah.
Almost. First reading for ordinance 2021-24, an ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to enter into an agreement by and between the city of Findlay and Utility Service Company Incorporated, appropriating and transferring funds.
Mr. Greeno.
I believe that this ordinance will then get us up to the contract commitment that we are committed to for this year. So I would like to make a motion that statutory rules of council be suspended and give us a second, third reading.
Second, Mr. Haas. All those in favor of suspending the rules of council, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
And Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-24, ordinance 2021-24.
Mr. Greeno.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-024.
Second, Mr. Haas. Discussion, questions, or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the ordinance, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Did I say Mr. Slough?
The ordinance is adopted. Any old business? Any new business? Mr. Wilson.
I'd like to call the strategic planning committee meeting for March 16th at 5:30 PM to be held in council chambers.
Any other new business? Ms. Mayor.
Yes.
Just a couple of quick items. Appreciate your action on the legislation regarding the transmitters and meter projects. Did want to let you know, and Jason came in today to tell me we were notified that most likely the transmitters the 2G will probably be completely gone by the end of this year. So we probably will have to accelerate the project a little bit further, but we will keep you posted as we work through that. But I know our team is chomping at the bit to get moving on that so we can get those transmitters that are currently dead replaced and that system updated. But appreciate your action on that so that we make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's crossed for the auditor's office. I think we've covered everything else, so I won't belabor the points. Thank you for your time tonight.
Any other new business?
I have one.
Mr. Schmelzer.
Did anybody talk about us getting Micropolitan of the Year again yet?
Oh, yeah.
You should.
I've been talking about it all over town, but
Old news.
7 years running.
No, actually, I should comment. Hopefully you guys all saw the emails, you all saw the announcements. though it's become a bit of a routine announcement over the last number of years, I think it is important to note that it really doesn't happen by accident. A lot of the great work that we do here and the City of Findlay team do to create, strong infrastructure, low cost, services really goes a long way. But certainly our businesses continuing to thrive even during the pandemic and being able to reinvest in our community and attract new businesses and do all of those things. It takes a lot of work from a lot of people. And so thank you to everything that you guys do, and it is certainly a community recognition, and I'm proud to continue to be able to represent the community. And I know I had a lot of calls from different state and federal leaders, and they continue to be proud of Findlay and all that we're able to accomplish. So thank you, Paul, for reminding me. Feels like it should be like a month from when the announcement was, yesterday, but that's beside the point. So thank you all.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
For the three people who may be watching that did not read the news release, only in the paper, as I recall, we finished higher than the top team in the top city in the next tier up, and the next tier up beyond that we tied with them, if I recall. So we it's just astonishing and it's outstanding the job that we do in this community.
Any other new business? Hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Mr. Niemeyer, second Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of adjourn, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. We are adjourned.
Dennis, you don't want to stay the night?
I guess I was asleep at this point.